Chiron, the wounded healer, is getting ready to move into Taurus. And Chiron was abandoned at birth, rejected by society, poisoned by someone he trusted, and left with a wound that would never heal. Now, every time I share Chiron's story with my clients and community, everyone feels his pain and relates to it because Chiron suffered every pain of the human experience. And when you understand his journey, you can connect the dots to the one thing you're really transforming in others on your own quest to heal yourself. In this part two of my four-part Chiron and Taurus series, we're going to map out Chiron's awakening journey so you can get to the root of what you're healing and transforming through your work. I'm Leslie Tagorda, a business astrologer and creator of the Astrobrand method, blending more than 20 years of brand strategy with the precision of astrology to help entrepreneurs and underrepresented leaders make their mark. Okay, friends. So Chiron is getting ready to move into Taurus, and I'm really excited because I assume that there's a lot of us Chiron and Taurus listeners. Now, earlier in part one, I shared my own Chiron story. I have Chiron and Aries, and the question that I've been asking myself, the wound that will never heal in myself, who am I? Is it safe to be me? And in the 11th house, is it safe to be me in groups and tribes? Yes, that's my Achilles heel. I guess my Chiron wound, rather, if we're talking mythic gods and heroes here. Now, in the introduction, I mentioned a few of Chiron's milestones growing up, from being abandoned at birth to being left with a mortal wound, and at the very end, trading his immortality with Prometheus. Now, when we dive into the story of his myth, it's really simple to map each of those arcs, those story arcs, with one of his lifelong pains, and then map it to how you feel these pains in your own life. Now, I know that this is deep work, and maybe if you need a trusted friend or a therapist, I encourage you to do this work because when we can look at these wounds, when we can go into the darkness of the cave, this is when true healing can happen. But sometimes you need support, and sometimes you need to make this fun. And so I hope you're having fun by doing some of these deep dives with me. So, what I want you to do right now is click pause, get a notebook, because we are going to be doing some story mapping. So the first thing that I want to do is tell you the myth of Chiron, from the perspective that I love seeing this. So Chiron was conceived through, unfortunately, sexual assault when Kronos, also known as Saturn, decided to assault a water nymph. There's two water nymphs that it could have been, but most stories say this is Philyra. And as he Kronos disguised himself as a horse and assaulted Philyra. And when Philyra was pregnant and was giving birth to Chiron, when she first saw Chiron coming out looking like a centaur, half horse and half human, Philyra was like, I do not want this baby. Chiron horrified his own mother, and she begged to be turned into a linden tree to escape her shame as she literally threw Chiron away. Luckily for Chiron, Chiron was found by the twins Apollo and Artemis, who raised him. You know, Apollo teaching him all of the fine arts like medicine and herbology and oracles and astrology, and Artemis the hunter taught him how to hunt. Chiron became just like the perfect child, the perfect student, really always exceeding his expectations that Apollo and Artemis put to him. Yet he never really belonged to his wild centaur kin either. Now, when Chiron was born, and you'll see a couple of different paintings of this, but it is known that Chiron, unlike the other centaurs that was all horse on the bottom with a human head, Chiron actually had his front two legs that were human legs and his hind section as a horse. And so you'll see some of these some paintings, old paintings portrayed with a full human body with a horse rear. And so, he didn't really like the rest of the wild centaurs who were really raucous, who just loved to party, like he was much more, I would say, maybe, I don't know if he was introverted, but he was much more studious, looking at his flowers, studying music, studying astrology, unlike all of those wild partying centaurs who just like to cause a ruckus. Now, as his life goes on, and through his childhood, he's exceeding his expectations, learning all of the things that Apollo and Artemis have taught him. There's a story, and it has this is these verbal stories tend to go in a lot of different directions. So, the one thing that I want you to understand about this particular story is that as he gets older, he is struck by an accident. For whatever reason, there's sometimes like he is preparing for a war, he's preparing for a conflict. He had the venom of Hydra, this multi headed serpent, and this venom from Hydra is able to kill a man, like a mortal wound. And so he was playing with this venom and playing with this. I don't know if I want to say play, but whatever he was doing, he was working with the venom and he was working with a poisoned arrow. And the story goes in two ways. In one story, he was struck by a friend with this poison arrow on his left leg somewhere. Some people say it was his foot. Some people say it was his knee. Some people say it was his thigh. Somewhere on his left leg, this poison arrow gashed him. In one story, again, it was his friend that betrayed him and gashed him. And in another story, it was Chiron's own accident. He did it himself with self-sabotage. And so either way, at this point where Chiron gets his great wound, this is the idea of betrayal, of sabotage. Now, this sabotage literally ran deep because it was the poison, the venom of Hydra. This venom was supposed to kill him, but because remember, Chiron is like half god, so he was immortal. And instead of killing him, it just created this terrible chronic pain. And so Chiron was already on his way to a healer. Remember, Apollo taught him medicine and herbology. And so Chiron's really on his way of being a healer. But everything he did to try to heal himself wasn't working. So I like to say he traveled the universe, but he traveled his world, picking up all the knowledge he could to try to heal his chronic pain, visiting all of these different practitioners and learning all these different modalities, finding all of these rare herbs and medicines, and nothing helped him to get relief from this sabotage, from this betrayal. He had his immortal incurable wound and literally became the wounded healer. Now, because he was immortal and couldn't die, and his wound just started to fester, he was absolutely powerless to fix himself. However, because he was such a gifted and skilled healer, he knew everything under the universe in terms of like healing modalities and medicines and herbs. People would come to him from far and wide to be healed from Chiron. So much so that he built his own temple. I think it has a funny name like Chironium or something like that. He built this temple where people would come to him. And I want you to remember this temple. We're going to come back to this temple. And he was able to heal others in his healing temple, becoming the wounded healer. And such a master, like a true master, that he has taught some of like the greatest mythological healers like Jason and Acephalus. And he not only was he healing other people, but he was teaching other people about all of this medicinal and healing arts. Now, towards the end of his life, he just couldn't deal with this pain anymore. And because he wasn't able to die because of his immortality, he begged the gods to trade places with Prometheus. You might know Prometheus's story. The eagle would come and like take out his liver over and over and over so he wouldn't die. And so instead, Chiron traded places with Prometheus, chose to die, and was placed among the stars. And so this release and acceptance that I'm going to have this wound that is going to stay with me forever. And the release and the acceptance doesn't mean that we have to die. I'm not saying that, but there's part of our identity that accepts. And in this release, we get to become a star. And so, what I want you to do when we take a look at all of these core human pains and experiences, rejection and abandonment at birth, betrayal and self sabotage as he's growing up, suffering with an incurable wound and learning everything possible to relieve that pain, becoming the master and the person that people go to for healing, teaching others and doing the gifted work, and then finally accepting that even though we seem imperfect, even though we might be suffering from this wound, we are still whole and we still have so much to give. And so, as we look at these 5 points from rejection through acceptance, this is where I want you to get your notebook, because I want you to jot down those feelings of, when did you feel the most rejected and abandoned? And how do you feel unloved or just not fitting in anywhere, feeling inherently flawed? I don't need you to go into this to like dig up old pains, but I want you to get curious about that part of your story as it relates to your Chiron gift that we'll get to. Then, with the betrayal and self sabotage, how do you self sabotage yourself? How have you noticed people, not living up to what they say that you were going to do, or even to the point where they're actually harming you? And what we're looking at here, again, not just to look at the pain, but looking at what have you learned by doing the work that you love, that over and why do you self-sabotage, or how does it come through when you're doing what you love, something like comes through and knocks you off course so that you have to get back on again. Now, going to his wound, this incurable wound that cannot kill him, but creates so much pain. This is where it gets really, really juicy. If you're going to focus on just one of these going deep, I want it to be this one for you. Because notice that as Chiron was living with his pain, he went out on search for more modalities of healing, more ways to resolve his pain, all the rare herbs, all of the rare medicines, all of the rare modalities from all over the place. Now, in your life, what were those things that you gathered? Maybe there were special learning certificates or therapy or different kinds of skills or interests that you gathered because you were trying to ultimately connect the dots to healing your incurable wound. Okay. And so here, what we're doing is we're finding all of the skills and the ingredients of your greatest gift come from Chiron, searching the greatest expanses for all these different modalities, all of these different herbs, all of these different medicines. What are those for you? And as as Chiron becomes the actual wounded healer, as he creates his temple, as people come to him, as he's teaching others, this is your gift. Remembering that the wound now becomes this tremendous gift. What is your healing temple? What do people come to you for? What are you teaching others to do? And it might not exactly be what you're doing. And so now we're trying to close that gap and make it so much more impactful. Now, remember, like Chiron, you don't need to be healed to be that person for others. You already have that wisdom from living through it. Your lived experience is truly your expertise. And as Chiron moves into the stars, trading places with Prometheus, this last part is, what wound in yourself do you finally need to just accept and not necessarily let it go, but accept and validate and just see that this is your true gift. Thank it, be grateful for it, because if it wasn't for that, you would not be doing what you're doing now. So I want you to really inventory. I want you to inventory all of the things, all of the skills that you picked up to answer your Chiron question, to soothe your core wounds. And I want you to understand what you mastered, what you experienced to survive your own wilderness. Because when you combine these two together, this is your gift of contribution. Remember in part one, I shared my story of my Chiron and Aries in the 11th house. Who am I? Is it safe to be me? That's the Aries. Is it safe to be in groups? Who am I in groups? And that my one survival wound is comparisonitis. I'm always comparing myself to others and always trying to fit in what the other person is doing because of survival. But when I inventory everything that I've learned about becoming and identity and how we craft an identity according to our alignment in the stars, not based on who other people tell us we're going to be, this is my gift of contribution. And so remember that when you have your gift of contribution, just like Chiron, Chiron created his temple, and people coming to his temple is a form of consent. In my greater class, Chiron, I have a bigger intensive Chiron class that I'll probably release in the near future. Will we do this again? That Chiron temple is a form of consent. If we're still going around trying to save other people's, in Cartman's drama triangle, we have the martyr, the victim, and the perpetrator. If we are still playing our Chiron wounds in that drama triangle, we are still playing the victim. Like, how could you do that to me? Life is sucks. Life is so horrible to me. And you're blaming everybody. That's not going to bring you your leadership or your change making power. And if you're then unintentionally hurting people by trying to save them without consenting to save, or from your wounded place you're acting out and hurting others because like that kind of unrecognized wounds, it's so easy to lash out on others. Or again, if you're the martyr, just running around like a fire engine trying to put out all these fires without being invited to help. This is where we get stuck in the drama triangle. And so consent breaks us out of that drama triangle and really allows us to help others and contribute our greatest gift. And so, what is that for you? I want you to go back and, chart those story arcs and see how that answers your Chiron story. Remember, Chiron by zodiac as well as Chiron by house placement. If you have that Chiron opposition from Uranus, like so many of us do, Again, I'm going to do a video on that later. That is a sure sign that you're a cycle breaker. And so you can see that Chiron pattern as a pattern that you inherited. And, that comes from your society or your family structure. And how are you breaking free of that? So I want to hear what lands for you and what you've noticed is your Chiron healing that you are here to offer the world. All right, in part 3, and we're going to be taking a look at what Chiron in Taurus, for those of you that are approaching your Chiron return, wants late Gen Xers and early millennial leaders to know. So let me know what you think. And if you like this, please share this with a friend and remember to subscribe. So thank you again. If this podcast has touched your heart, please share it with others. Please leave me a rating and review so we can reach the hearts of even more change makers like you.